Hello, American National Government class. This is Professor Gustafson coming at you. One last time here in this last chapter of the book, Chapter 17 on Foreign Policy. One of my favorite chapters in the whole course. In fact, I teach an entire class called International Relations that deals with this subject matter generally in a kind of more of an international perspective. But nevertheless, it's I enjoy this topic quite a bit. So you should have your PowerPoint for it. And if you want to follow along with me, you're more than welcome to. If you want to look at slide number 2, the Constitution says at the very beginning, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, and provide for the common defense. So there is a provision in our Constitution that provides the means to defend the nation. In fact, I would say that is one of the core purposes for the national government. And a lot of times, you know, in a day and an age of entitlements, and in a day and an age of government bailouts, in a day and an age of this coronavirus challenge, and just, you know, so much of the big government that tends to tend to all of the needs of the interest groups within this country. Many times we lose sight of the fact that one of the fundamental aspects of the federal government was to basically provide for defense. And the cornerstone of our policy is national interest. In other words, when we start talking about national defense and where we should get involved in another part of the world, the fundamental question is getting involved in this part of the world, how does it serve our physical security? Okay, how does it provide for our national interests? You know, if you go into some country in sub-Saharan Africa because of supposed terrorism or something of that nature. Okay, in order to see if it's truly constitutional and if it truly fits within the framework of how the founders set things up, you have to look at, okay, how is being over in Botswana, okay, how does that affect us? All right. In other words, how are we being directly attacked by Botswana? Are we being directly attacked by terrorists from Botswana? If the answer is yes, then perhaps we should be involved there. If the answer is fundamentally no, it begs the question, what are we doing? Because again, the fundamental concern of foreign policy and defense is our national interest, okay, you know, becoming military prepared and things of that nature, being involved in productive trade relations and the like. So if you go to the next slide, that would be what, slide number 3, you see a picture of an injured Syrian refugee, all right, and there was a civil war in Syria that over 150,000 people were killed and millions were forced to flee their homes. I've got friends of mine that are missionaries to Germany, and a big part of what they're doing in their missionary endeavors in Germany is not ministering to the German people, but they're actually ministering to Syrian refugees that have escaped and literally traveled across the Med Sea in some way, shape, or form, and basically ended up on the border of Germany. And so they've been inundated with all kinds of refugees. Okay, so if you're talking about foreign policy and if you're talking about, you know, defense policy, you know, should we be involved in Syria? Is the fighting within Syria something that the United States should get involved in? Again, your heart goes out to the 150,000 people that were killed, and your heart goes out to the millions that have been displaced, but how does that serve American interest? How does that serve American foreign policy? Okay, from a national self-interest standpoint, not much. However, if human rights and and some form of a genocide is something that we are concerned about as Americans, then perhaps. Okay, probably the closest we've been involved militarily in Syria was 3 years ago now, in 2017, about late winter, spring of 2017, when pictures of the Assad regime, basically they chemical bomb their own people. So you had pictures of children and young and old, basically pictures of them being, basically deformed by chemical weapons and things of that nature. And so in seeing those pictures, President Trump ordered that missiles be basically launched from American ships in the Mediterranean Sea in a precision laser strike attack upon the very area within Syria that was producing these chemical weapons, and they did that. Okay, that is a good example of, in my estimation, good foreign policy when it comes to defense in an area of the world that it is not our place to send troops in there and go invade Syria. Okay, and a president, and again, I'm using this example, but this type of precision laser strike has happened in previous administrations. This gets the job done. It communicates a message. It does not commit U.S. troops. It does not commit ground forces or any type of invasion, and yet very quickly communicates to a dictator that we mean business, and yet does not get the nation engaged in such a way that would evoke, again, who's connected to Syria? Iran. Who's connected to Syria and Iran? Russia. You run the risk of that, of getting involved in Syria. If Syria has not declared war on us or overtly attacked us, you got to be real careful in getting involved in that part of the world because of the allies of the Syrian people. So anyway, some things to consider there. So looking at the next slide, that would be slide number 4, you look at major foreign policy themes. Prior to World War II, America generally took an isolationist policy. Okay, is that we were primarily involved in the internal concerns of the United States, or perhaps in Central and South America, but we did not want to get involved in European entanglements. And so there was something called the Monroe Doctrine, which basically said that the United States would not get involved in foreign countries unless those countries, again, they were directly taking a shot at Europe, unless European countries got involved in our particular hemisphere, okay, things of that nature. So we tried to kind of stay out of things. And if you think about it, America is perfectly positioned to be neutral, okay? It's separated, thousands of miles from Europe, thousands and thousands and, just all kinds of miles from China and from Japan and from Asia. And so you've got a northern neighbor that is generally friendly to us, the Canadians. We're not really worried about attacks from the Canadians. And Mexicans, with the exception of the immigration crisis that we have on our southern border, we're not really concerned about any kind of military invasion. So America has kind of had the luxury, if you will, because of its geography, of basically being taking on that isolationist standpoint. Because again, and we're going to see here, I'll show you some quotes from the founding era. They were very concerned that if the United States got involved in some of the political intrigues going on in Europe, it would suck America into some war that we, quite frankly, didn't want to get involved in. And in particular, there was no self-interest there. There was no national interest concerns. We had no skin in the game. We had no dog in the hunt, so to speak. So if you go to the next couple of slides, that would be slide number 5 and 6. You can see a quote from President Washington in his farewell address, and he gives a really clear example of this isolationist policy. So let's just read it here. He says, as avenues to foreign influence in innumerable ways, such attachments are particularly alarming to the truly enlightened and independent patriot. How many opportunities do they afford to tamper with domestic factions, to practice the arts of seduction, to mislead public opinion, to influence or awe the public council? Such an attachment of a smaller weak towards a greater powerful nation dooms the former to be the satellite of the latter. Again, he's talking about just staying away from these foreign intrigues. Against the insidious wiles of foreign influence, I can conjure you to believe me, fellow citizens, the jealousy of a free people ought to be constantly awake, since history and experience prove that foreign influence is one of the most baneful foes of Republican government. So in other words, as foreign nations get involved in the electoral process for elected representatives or for a president, okay? That can really mess up a country that's trying to stay, again, Republican. This idea that we've got elected representatives that represent us. We're not a direct democracy. And then the next slide, again, this is the punchline, okay? This is what you need to remember as the fundamental principle of foreign policy for the United States from the founding era up until World War I for sure, and definitely up until World War II. The great rule of conduct for us in regard to foreign nations is in extending our commercial relations to have as with them as little political connections as possible. So as far as I repeated, therefore, let those engagements be observed in the genuine sense. But in my opinion, it is unnecessary and would be unwise to extend them. Taking care always to keep ourselves by suitable establishments on a respectively defensive posture, we may safely trust to temporary alliances for extraordinarily emergencies. Okay, so what Washington envisioned is for the United States to have commercial relations with other countries. In other words, trade with them, buy, sell, okay, do business. Again, part of the logic of that, and this is developed later on, but it's much easier to stay in good relationships with the country if you're trading with them than if you're not trading with them, because if you're not trading with them, you don't have a whole lot of skin in the game, and so if you went to war with them, what do you have to lose? Whereas if you've got millions or billions or even trillions of dollars of investment going back and forth in business and things of that nature, countries tend to not go to war because, again, they're shooting themselves in the foot. Again, I'm not saying this is gonna stay for always, but the United States has not gone to war with China. For one, I mean, there's a number of reasons. One very good one is we've got a lot of American factories over there. And we've got a lot of American workers over there. So to go to war against China, we literally have to bomb our own factories and bomb our own people. Okay, so in other words, that's what he's talking about. Commercially be involved, but not politically. Again, politically, the idea that you get involved in some of the internal concerns of that country, Washington warned no entangling alliances. Because if you're allied with a country over again, let's just say the United States is allied with Great Britain and Britain gets attacked by France. Well, guess what? Since we're allied with Britain, we might have pledged to defend Great Britain in the case of attack. Now suddenly we're fighting France, which we have no issue with. And suddenly now you can see where that happened. Again, this is exactly what happened in World War II, where you had all these alliances going on in these European countries. So when the Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated, then you had Austria, which went to war against Serbia, but then Austria was connected to all these nations and Serbia was connected to all these nations. Suddenly, because of multiple entanglements and multiple foreign alliances, you literally had the creation of, well, a world war, okay? And so Washington's saying, listen, temporary alliances for extraordinary emergencies. What would be an example of a temporary alliance for an extraordinary emergency? An example of that would be NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, okay, that we signed and created after World War II, that the free European countries agreed with the United States and they pledged their support with one another. So if one free European country, let's say Germany, was attacked by Russia. Again, it was basically the countries that were aligned with freedom against the Soviet Union. If the Soviets attacked Great Britain, then America would come in. Again, it was this idea. It was meant to be kind of a temporary thing. Here we are 70 years later. Is that alliance, is that an extraordinary emergency today? It probably doesn't fall into that criteria. And so, again, you can see the wisdom of what Washington was talking about. Because, again, you can see many of these global adventures that the United States has been involved in Korea and in Vietnam, of course, and in other areas. Again, of course, the Middle East. You know, if the reason we're involved is because of a direct attack on the United States, then rightfully so. If we're involved in a lot of these foreign adventures because it's not directly due to an attack against the United States and it's not in our direct national interest, then it begs the question, why are we there? And again, it's very interesting that not since World War II has a formal declaration of war been signed and delivered to the President of the United States by Congress. Okay? Every war after World War II, presidents have committed troops outside of a formal declaration of war. And has there been controversy and problems as a result of that? I would say yes. And so again, there's a lot of wisdom in how the founders set this up, where you could not declare, only Congress could declare war, and then the president can commit troops. Absent that, a president is not supposed to be able to do that. That was to limit the power of the executive and to connect wartime actions by America to the consensus of the American people through their elected representatives. Again, a congressional declaration of war.